245 kilometers off the frigid coast of Antarctica is an island where populations of Chinstrap penguins live in the thousands. But these penguins are more than just cute. The health of the Antarctic ecosystem relies on their well-being. So the scientists in this next documentary count them. Yeah, by hand, in the freezing cold and walking on steep cliffs. It's been years since this last happened, but the data collected will now inform them of how one of the most remote places on Earth is faring. If you want to know what it took to film in such a hostile and rather crowded location, stick around after the credits for a Q&A with the filmmakers. And now from GreenPeace International, this is Disappearing Penguins.
On the far side of the planet lies one of the most remote and inhospitable places on Earth. Elephant Island, situated just off the tip of the Antarctic peninsula, is a rugged landscape of cliffs and glaciers shaped by brutal winds. It's also home to vast colonies of one of Antarctica's most iconic animals. Supported by environmental organization GreenPeace, a team of scientists lands on Elephant Island. For the first time in 50 years, they will investigate how its penguins are faring. The health of the Antarctic ecosystem is linked to the state of penguin populations. And the best way to measure those is by counting the birds.
So we're counting penguins, and why do we count penguins? Well, penguins are great bioindicators, and they'll tell us what the health of the ocean around Antarctica is because they eat krill. Krill eat phytoplankton, so we can tell indirectly what the productivity of the oceans around here, how it's responding to environmental change. And so we can't really adequately count the phytoplankton. It's really difficult to count the krill, but we can count penguins because they come ashore every year to these same places to breed, and we're getting some idea about how the ocean is performing by how penguin populations change over time. And we go nest by nest. We're counting nests because we want to know what the breeding population is. We're not interested in all these penguins that are roaming around that you see kind of wandering about here. A lot of those are non-breeders. They just come here because there's a lot of penguins, a lot of activity. We want to know what the size of the breeding population is because that's what's going to make new penguins for the future. And those are the most sensitive parts of this population.
There are multiple penguin species on Elephant Island, such as the gentoo with their distinctive orange beak, the flamboyant macaroni penguin, and even these towering king penguins, carefully shuffling across the island. Michael. The researchers record all penguins, but are mainly interested in chinstraps, so called for the narrow black band on the underside of their heads. The chinstraps are the noisiest and most numerous penguin on the island. And since weather conditions here are not always suitable for field work, the race is on to find out exactly how numerous the chinstraps still are.
There's 4 of us penguin counters. One person says, okay, I'll take the high point up to the right. One person says, I'll go up high to the left. One person, that's me today, starts down low, and we'll work our way up, and then we all meet in the middle. And it's important to divide it up like that so that we can be sure not to be counting the same penguins twice.
It's January, which means the height of Antarctic summer. With 1 or 2 chicks to each nest, the colonies are dense packs of shrieking and pecking birds, which makes moving around a delicate affair.
Normally we don't try to walk through the colony because it's so dense, but here there's just no free space in between the penguins. So very carefully, you try to step on the high stones between the birds and obviously not get too close to their nests if you can. Counting penguins at its core is pretty basic. It really is 1, 2, 3. We actually count them all 3 times to try to get a count that's within 5% error. It kind of looks crazy sometimes. We're standing on a rock gazing over a penguin colony, very still, with our arms out. And it looks like we're conducting a symphony of penguins or something like that, because we're out there really looking at every single individual penguin and literally counting heads. And if there's only 10 penguins in a colony, it's pretty easy. If there's 100, you can get through them. If you're surrounded by 1,000 penguins in one big blob, that's what I would call advanced penguin counting.
But some colonies are over 10,000 individuals, and chinstraps love to nest on steep and exposed cliffs that are hard to reach on foot. So to count all of these flightless birds, your best bet is to take to the air.
So when we get to colonies that are so big that it's almost infeasible to count by hand, we use aerial surveys. The idea is to capture all colonies with aerial images so that we can either use a manual count or a machine learning algorithm to do the counts for us. When we arrive at a site, we do a quick lay of the land where the different colonies are, and then we pick out a system where we can make sure that we don't miss any of the colonies. So we start at a logical point and set up a grid survey with GPS locations of the boundaries of the colonies, and then we launch the drone and have it run the grid patterns. And at that point, it's pretty hands-off. It flies to the first point and heads to the series of waypoints, and the drone is able to take photos every 2 seconds. And that's how we can get a set of images with a decent amount of overlap that can be used in the next step, which is photomosaicing. Once it finishes the whole survey, we retrieve it, and that's how we can finish a site and then walk over to the next area, and so on.
For a bird nerd like me, being in the middle of a penguin colony here in a practically unexplored island in Antarctica is like the ultimate experience. I can't even describe it. It makes my skin tingle when we're on the Zodiac and we're coming into the beach, just seeing all these birds waiting for us to arrive. Penguins. They're so easy to empathize with because they act like people in so many ways. They have all these curious behaviors. They run around, they're always on a mission, up to something. They're very energetic, they're charismatic. Penguins are really amazing creatures. They are hardcore, and they have some pretty amazing adaptations to survive here. They have the densest packed feathers of any bird in the world. It's something like 90 feathers per square inch. That gives them their waterproof parka and down jacket all in one. They spend a lot of their time swimming. They can swim for months at a stretch without stopping. They sleep on the ocean. The only reason they ever come to land at all is to build a nest, and then they go and spend the rest of their lives actually in the ocean, offshore. And to be an animal that only exists in the Southern Ocean for months at a time, just swimming around, finding the fish and krill that they need to eat, that is hard for us to imagine and comprehend, and that I think is partly why it's so fascinating for us to see penguins down here. I think that we can learn a lot by watching birds, because birds, at their core, need most of the same things that we do. They need a place to live, they need food, they need to find a mate and leave a legacy. I think that also birds experience all kinds of similar emotions and thoughts and feelings. So I think by coming out here and doing these studies, it's almost like we're looking at our own behavior through the prism of another species, and that gives us a license to take a step back and say, oh yeah, okay, that's what's really happening.
Penguin colonies may remain in place for centuries, and chinstraps, even though they venture out to sea for hundreds of miles, always return to the same colony to breed. The last and only time Elephant Island's penguin population was properly surveyed was in 1971. The maps and data from that British Joint Services expedition are now being used by the present-day researchers.
So we've got some great data from 50 years ago about what the penguin populations looked like. So we'll compare our counts to that historic data, and we'll get some idea about whether things are changing or not.
Penguins are extremely well adapted to live in Antarctica in these conditions. But when those conditions then start to change, that's when we start getting worried about them, because they've evolved over so many eons to live in this place as it is. And then as it starts to change, then we'll see how adaptable the penguins can be.
The Antarctic is witnessing vast changes. Over the past 50 years, temperatures have risen by around 3 degrees centigrade, one of the fastest increases in the world. Among other things, the warming affects ice formation. And the underside of sea ice is a critical habitat for krill, the shrimp-like creatures which are food for many of Antarctica's animals, including chinstrap penguins.
The climate change losers here are chinstrap penguins. Everywhere else we go on the peninsula, we're seeing chinstrap declines over the last 50 years, and it's been dramatic. Some of those populations have declined as much as 50%. We've seen chinstrap colonies completely vanish.
A changing climate is not the only threat to chinstraps. In recent years, krill fishing has caused competition for their food, creating additional pressure on the penguins in ways we are yet to fully understand. After 10 days of counting and covering 98% of the colonies surveyed in 1971, it's time for the researchers to add up the results.
44, 45, 45, 16 3 times.
All of Elephant Island's 32 colonies show declines, and overall the chinstrap population has fallen by almost 60% in 50 years.
11 3 times. We try to keep an impartial look at this in terms of our emotional response to the data. It's disturbing from the standpoint of the amount of change that's happening so rapidly. We just don't see this kind of stuff in other ecosystems generally. If you'd seen this with, say, any terrestrial mammal species over a 50-year period, people would be certainly concerned. It suggests the amount of change that's happening here, how rapid it is. And it remains to be seen what the ultimate consequences are, not just for chinstrap penguins, but for the ecosystem as a whole.
If you removed all the penguins from Antarctica, what would happen? I don't want to do that experiment as a scientist or as a person who loves birds. Penguins are a keystone in Antarctica. There's something like 90% of the avian biomass in this region is penguins, and there are millions and millions of them. We are seeing some worrying declines in their populations. So right now I'm not so much worried that the chinstrap penguin is going to go extinct as that they're telling us that something in their larger ecosystem is broken in some way, and that the changes in their populations are reflecting that.
I've been coming down here for 25 years, and I've seen some pretty remarkable changes. Been seeing penguin populations crash, literally. Climate's changing more rapidly in the Antarctic Peninsula probably than any place on the planet. It's very likely that when we experience these things in our temperate climates where we all live, we're also going to have to adapt, just as the chinstrap penguins are doing right now. So it's a lesson for us, because we either are going to heed this example that we're seeing down here in the Antarctic, or we won't. And we'll suffer the consequences, just as, unfortunately, the chinstrap penguins seem to be doing down here. They don't have a chance to control their environment. They're stuck with whatever we hand them, but we have the ability to change, and we should take serious measures to do so.
Antarctica has always been a continent that has challenged us. Now its challenge is for us to leave it unharmed and establish large-scale protection for those living on the edge.
Now let's hear from the ground team on their experience of Elephant Island and its special occupants.
So I'm Frida Bengtsson, and I was the expedition leader for the expedition where this film was made.
My name is Maarten van Rouveroy, and I was the onboard cameraman filmmaker for this project that the film resulted from.
GreenPeace is one of the oldest environmental organizations, and it's truly global. So it was started 50 years ago, so turning 50 years actually today, with a sort of aim of a greener and peaceful world.
Yeah, so Elephant Island, where we did most of the filming, it's very inhospitable and it's been visited by very few people. Quite famously, this is where Ernest Shackleton, the British explorer, stranded with his men, and they had to survive in the Antarctic winter. For us, it was a bit more comfortable because we were based on a ship and we did these landings from inflatable boats on the shore. Then it's a pretty rocky shore, so you'd basically almost be launched onto the shore like a penguin, and then you'd have to bring all your equipment on board and sort of clamber onto these pretty slippery rocks. And then the scientists would go off and find the penguin colonies. The photographer and I and some of the other people from GreenPeace, we were basically following the scientists with the caveat that the scientists can actually go into the penguin colonies, and we had to stay sort of on the outside not to cause too much disturbance to the colony.
It's very weather dependent, and everything shifts very, very quickly in Antarctica. So it's a matter of safety, really. Like, how safely can we get people ashore and safe, and if something happens, can we get them off in time? So I think the key thing for us doing this was to have enough time, really, to give dedicated time for the scientists to count, because normally they have a very short period of time. So counting Elephant Island took 11 days in total. The counting takes a substantial amount of time, actually, because every single penguin is counted 3 times. So they don't count the grown-up penguins, they count the penguin chicks, so the little young ones. And it's also quite interesting because you have to do that when they're still in the nest, because once they get a bit older, they start moving around, and then this task is basically impossible. But they were very, very quick, so I actually tried once to help them to count some penguins, and I counted very few and they counted very many. I was not very correct and they were very correct. I think so it's a very special skill that they have learned over the years. So Elephant Island belongs to a distinct planning area of Antarctica, and Antarctica is divided into 2 separate planning areas. And this is what is referred to the Domain 1 planning area. And there are ongoing conversations about establishing a marine protected area in that area, which encompasses Elephant Island. And there are conversations ongoing on sort of what does it mean, what we have found, sort of the decline in Chinstrap penguins on Elephant Island, and what kind of management consequences should that have. So even if there is nothing that has happened more than that, we've seen more scientific evidence that like change is happening in Antarctica, and it's happening fast.
I guess one piece of advice, which is a bit of a cliche, but I mean, in this day and age when technology is so accessible and it's become easier to shoot film. Actually, what's really king, even more now than in the past, is the story. We were lucky here that there was a very clear, very good story. The other thing I always tell people is to really think about the target audience, because I think, you know, we're with environmental filmmaking, with wildlife filmmaking, we're, I think, beyond the stage of just raising awareness. I think most people on this planet are aware of what's happening. Maybe we're in the next phase, really, where we need to act, because it's really not 5 to 12, we're past 12 now. And in order to be effective with a film, you really need to think about where your film's going to be seen. And that may be a massive audience, that always helps, but it could also just be a very targeted group of politicians or policymakers or other people who can influence the situation.
Yeah, I think to anyone who watches this film and sort of other films about the environment, I think what's important to take with you is like everything you do counts. Because sometimes we think that we have to do so much, but I like from my side where I said, you know, it's like having like everything from, you know, a couple of thousands to sort of millions of people that have signed a petition, for example. It's the world of difference when you go into a political negotiation or you're negotiating with a company. Like, people can sort of say like, oh, but like just signing a petition doesn't really mean anything. And I would say that it does. Like, it's sort of coming into a room with governments or industry and knowing that you have 3 million people behind you that support you and believe in what you're doing kind of changes the way you talk and the way you feel that you can sort of interact with people. And it's been because I think every small things that we do, every conversations we have with our family and colleagues at work, they do matter. And I think that's kind of in the end is kind of people's actions and big or small that will kind of make the difference.
Thanks for watching Seeker Indie screening of Disappearing Penguins. It's stories like these that can inspire more discoveries, more adventures, and new ideas that may one day help save our planet.